not in a long time has politics oriented so severely around like one particular issue like this, around the a sort of adjacent progressive talking point. You had the gay rights movement and you had the civil rights movement. But in both of those cases, they wanted something affirmative. Gay people wanted the right to marry, among other things. And, of course, the civil rights movement was about the passage of the Civil Rights Act and all the problems associated with it. In this case, nothing is happening. With the trans stuff, I mean, like, there's no, like, it's not as though trans people have done this giant march in Washington and the reactionary blowback is from that. Trans people are just sitting there quietly in their houses getting high. And Republicans are frothing over it. They're frothing at the mouths. So it feels very deliberate and very targeted, and it's all very unfortunate,
Yeah, it's just mean. It's just mean. And what's interesting to me is how there's people now. Actually, we did a show 2 nights ago, and there was a guest in our chat who I had picked up from doing the Michael Knowles show. Okay, so this guy, and he had like the Dixie flag was his little logo, and he asked me, is this guest a transgender? And my response was, we do not check our guests' genitalia. And so that seemed to sort of settle it at that point. But it's weird that that's something that anybody would think of. Where do these haters think that trans people have been all along? Like, do they think that this is just some new phenomenon that now people are just deciding to switch genders? Like the same people have been amongst us forever and just existing peacefully amongst us forever. Like, it's not an issue.
Exactly. And I think it really lays bare the fact that this has nothing to do with harm. It has nothing to do with harm, truth, reality, whatever, It's at the end of the day, it's about degeneracy. There is a fear of people who are aberrant or abnormal, and all of the political arguments are constructed to justify the targeting of those groups. But the sincere position is, I mean, I swear with a lot of the people who make those arguments, you can settle whatever you want with them. You could convince them of any empirical point. At the end of the day, it's an emotional bias they have.
Yes.
So it's pretty tough to argue against.
Yeah, it's irrational. It's completely irrational. Because if you even take somebody who's in that camp and I'm saying, okay, so then by your logic, I should walk into a ladies' room and see potentially a bearded man just standing there in like lumberjack clothes because he happens to have a vagina.
That's
way more uncomfortable for me. I got to tell you.
And there's no bigger pederasts than in the Catholic Church. Like, are we going to pretend like where the real crisis is on? I mean, listen, it doesn't matter. The political party argument is so stupid. But if we're going to be really direct about where the pederasts are,
they're on the right.
Yeah, and the big irony here is that one of the best things that you can do actually to prevent the sexual abuse of children is comprehensive sex education. Research has been done on this where, it's a lot easier to abuse a kid if they don't have the education to identify what's happening to them. So in a way, the right is actually targeting the most effective, because they're like, oh, parents should have a right to pull their kids out. They don't want to hear this, that, or the other. Like, and it's funny because in a way, like they're contributing more harm than they ever ascribed to the opposition. It's just destructive.
Yeah, I agree. Put up Sam's comment because I do agree. Our friend Sam is saying that he thinks that this has been, since more trans visibility, it's become more hate. And I agree. But we need to keep going until we cross over to what's acceptable.
Yeah.
Right? At this point, we've had to kind of push through it. I agree. You're right. There were no trans bathroom bills pre-Caitlyn Jenner. And so, that sparked their fear. And now it's up to us to kind of follow it through and be like, okay, I get you're scared, but that's your problem. Move on.
Exactly right. It's funny because it actually mirrors a lot of the fears that took place during desegregation. A lot of racist white women, of which there were plenty in the US in the 1960s, they knew black women were women, but they didn't think they were like them, So there was actually a push specifically to keep black women out of previously white women's restrooms. And the arguments employed there, it's this same concerns thing, well, there's no evidence on the table, sure, but we're very worried about X and Y. And I mean, at the end of the day, again, it's irrational, right?
Yeah.
I didn't mean to completely sideline on the holiest of all days, our weed day. Because that's also a really important political topic too. The fact that Joe Biden hasn't followed through on marijuana legalization like he said he would is a fucking disgrace, frankly.
Yeah.
But isn't that the bigger issue that we talk about on our show, which is corporate special interests have completely captured our government? When it comes to the core issues that we are really fighting against, you can have the wedge issues like Second Amendment, LGBTQ rights, abortion. There will always be that dividing line between the two factions, if you will, the biggest factions anyway. But when it comes to the issues at bar, whether it is cannabis legalization, employing the Defense Production Act to build a clean energy grid, expanding healthcare to everybody, a living wage, ending the wars. These are issues that overwhelmingly people agree on, and yet we're not getting them because corporate power has engulfed our government. Am I wrong?
No, absolutely not. I push hard for the progressive issues, but you have to do that while recognizing that at the end of the day, like, they're the easy plan. I mean, the same with marijuana legalization as well. Like, these are finger snap issues for the most part. And what does Biden have to do for trans people? I mean, very basic civil rights stuff. Most of it's already laid down. Not all of it, but a lot of it. The difficult work is the economic work. And both parties distract from that to varying extents as much as possible by taking opposite sides of this culture war business. Now, I still blame the Republicans overwhelmingly for this because the Republicans start these fights. They started the trans fight. You know, it's not like Democrats ran out there screaming about trans issues before Republicans started crying about the bathroom bills. It's pretty clear who initiates it. But in either case, the ongoing discourse does occupy a lot of discourse that might otherwise be dedicated to stuff like infrastructure or a higher minimum wage.
Right. And they like that, I think, and they like it. It's political theater. And yet real people get hurt, And I also think that even if we're not talking about policy, how the right tends to focus on one instance. It's very straw-man-y, like they go after, and somebody in the comment was asking about the swimmer, the trans swimmer, Leah Thomas, is that her name?
Yes.
Leah Thomas.
Yeah, I don't know enough about her. Actually, we need to have Mallory. I have a very good friend who is trans and is an athlete, and she has been she's always been athletic. She's an athletic person, and has really very reasonable things to say about this. But there are ways, people, to know whether somebody has been hormone transition long enough for it to be just and competitive. It's not rocket science. There have been studies that show this. So we need to just figure out what that is and come to an agreement.
And the problem is, and look, I do not agree with the whole Leah Thomas thing. What I would say, though, is that is what the right, though, unfortunately does, which is it latches onto one specific incident where you can have a justifiable response of this isn't correct, and then throw out everything else where it is completely justifiable and just say, well, all trans people suck. And so this is... And again,
trans athletes have been competing forever. Again, they're there.
But why is this a topic? The reason it's a topic is because it has nothing to do with real economic issues that we are desperately facing. I mean, you want to talk about a housing crisis? What we've got going on here in Florida? Holy effing.
Seattle.
Well, yeah. Well, if you're in Seattle, you know it as well. I mean, down here, you have literally a housing crisis, and this is the crap that DeSantis is going around making the rounds with. And why is that? Because there's no Democratic Party of note to really compete against him. So he can do whatever the hell he wants. He's literally going to waltz into a re-election, Vaush. That's what's going to happen.
No, I completely agree. And it's frustrating because, first of all, conservatives do not care about women's sports. Come on, okay? The joke, the idea that women's sports are like a joke and nobody pays attention to them was like a mainstream...
You have a nice hobby there.
Yeah. Just nobody, and the idea, they're making a national crisis out of what, a handful of cases over the course of 5 years where a trans woman has done reasonably well. We're not talking about breaking records, by the way. To my knowledge, none of the actual world records or Olympic medals or anything like that. I mean, it's just one trans girl did better in college sports than people thought she should. Well, that happens to cis people as well. First, when you isolate the variables, I mean, we have nothing in terms of a trend. But if you really want to, if people really cared about this issue, I mean, just leave it to the sports physicians. That's their job. It's very complicated. The extent to which hormones affect athletic performance, that's legitimately PhD cutting research stuff. Just Let them handle it. Stop politicizing it and stop distracting the national dialogue with, it's like that state bill in Utah when there's literally one trans woman participating in athletics in the entirety of the state. And they like, yes, we need to pass this state law to protect the people of Utah. What are you talking about? This is so fake.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.